Hello, BookTube. It's a quiet Sunday here at Hyde Cottage. I thought we'd go through a few books that are coming out early next year, next month, as a kind of January TBR. They're new releases, so you might have to get them from the library or maybe download them from NetGalley or spring for them at the bookstore. But I could do a few of these videos before we run out of time together. We've got a lot of natural history on the list this time around, starting with this one, Africa's Threatened Rhinos. The one thing I don't know about this is how illustrated it is. I don't know that about any of these books, but this is a story, basically a report from the front lines of the conservation status of Africa's two major kinds of rhinos. One species of which there are, I don't know, a couple of thousand, maybe. And the other species of which there are a couple of dozen, so effectively extinct. And I don't believe that this book has anything positive to report, but maybe the author is an optimist. Maybe it won't be completely depressing reading. I think the reality of the subject is that if you have little kids, they're going to grow up in a world that doesn't have any rhinoceroses, including in zoos. The ones in zoos will die off, and there won't be any way to propagate them. There aren't enough of them to make genetic diversity. Certainly no wild rhinoceroses, and no wild elephants either. Maybe some wild hippos. But anyway, then we have this is by Nir Ariely. This is a history of the Dead Sea. Again, I don't know the illustrations. I also don't remember off the top of my head how big this thing is. I'm hoping it's nice and long, because it's a fascinating subject about the Dead Sea, which is neither dead nor a sea. Touches on history at a whole bunch of different places. Then another natural history book. This is by Kim Frank, and it's called Elephants in the Hourglass. And it is about the Indian elephant. And I haven't read a good general, all-purpose, 30,000-foot view of the natural history and conservation status of the Indian elephant in a long time. Again, I think the story is only negative. I think the story is only a downward spiral towards extinction, just like their African cousins. But again, the author could surprise me. Then this next one, this is going to get reviewed everywhere, I think. This is going to get talked about everywhere. It's by Barry Sanders, and it's called The Manifesto of Herman Melville, in which the author says that that Moby Dick is not a novel, and that Melville never intended it to be a novel, and that it's something quite else. This is supposed to be a very radical reinterpretation of Moby Dick. And as some of you will know if you've watched this channel for any length of time, I love that. I invite it. It just has to convince me. That's all. Otherwise, well, I would ordinarily, if this were another month of the year, I would say that I'm certainly going to review this and that I will hold the author accountable for whether or not it's convincing. Since there was no Captain Ahab, I'm going to be interested in this author's contention that Melville did not consider Moby Dick to be a novel. But who knows? Maybe he'll surprise me. Then more natural history, this with slightly less doom and gloom to it. This is by John Shuey, and it is a big natural history of owls. All owls, not just the kind on the cover there. Probably it'll touch on 24 signature species. Probably it'll touch on a wide range of conservation issues, from the species that are endangered to the species that are not. If you're an owl fan, I am an owl fan. Back when I moved from the fainting couch, I would have vigorously objected if you had used the term birder on me, because bird watchers, people who have the bug for bird watching, are well known to be certifiably insane. So I would have bridled if you had used that term on me. And yet there was a time, many years in my life, when I was actively stalking owls, not to hurt them, of course, not even to take their picture, but just to spot them in the wild. It's much more complicated to do. Usually it's much more complicated to do than finding some of the rarer little bird species. Sometimes nature can make it easy to make an informal spotting of an owl, because owls are often mobbed during the day by crows and ravens. And that means that if you're walking your dog out in a field and you hear an almighty ruckus from the top of a tree nearby, you should always stop and take a look. I wouldn't say train your binoculars, because of course you don't have them on you, but your phone can telephoto. That's really, usually that's a very good way, a very distressing way, because the owl's having the worst day of their life, but a very good way to see an owl, because it's almost always an owl that they're mobbing. Crows and ravens will sometimes mob raptors, but more often owls who aren't going to fight back during the day. But the real test is to find and observe owls in their own peaceful hunting habitat at either dawn or sunset. And I spent years doing that. So I feel a connection with them that is going to make this book extra interesting. Although owls are one of those birds that I don't think anybody needs any help to find interesting. Then we have a biography. This is by Volker Leppin. No idea what I'm getting here. Obviously, this could go two ways. I always say that popular biographies can go in one of two directions. They can either be good. Of course, good has its own range of, they can either be conscientious, in other words, weighing the evidence, not going in with a program ahead of time. That can still be boring. That's usually boring. But there's either that or there's hagiography. There's someone going in determined to write a saint's life of their subject. And this book brings that fork in the road right up into immediate view, because the hagiography here would be quite literal. This is a biography of Francis of Assisi. So will it be good, or will it be pious? Or will it be that rarest of rare things? God help us, I could count them on the fingers of one hand. A book that is both pious and scholarly rigorous. I swear, sometimes I think that Erasmus of Rotterdam took that with him to the grave. But you never know. I'm definitely going to read it. The thing about, the biography of a saint, about whom there's a lot more folklore than fact, is that you'll know right away if you're reading something that's uncritical genuflection. What's the trouble, Bubble? You want to come down here? Give them some free yoga? Oh, goodness. Oh, Grace. Oh. Right to the tips of your toes. You can do it. There you go, baby. Are you going to make a bed, or are you just going to lay down? No, you're going to make a bed. A little bed. Oh. What are you doing? Oh, goodness. Don't let that blanket get away with it, Frida. Teach it who's boss. Oh. Oh, goodness. Oh. You having second thoughts? Do you want to come back over here? I don't think you know what you want, little girl. Anyway, this comes out next month. We'll see. You go into it forewarned. It could be incredibly disappointing. An actual scholarly examination of the life materials of Francis of Assisi would be fascinating. I haven't known it to happen in 50 years. Then we have something by Lee Frantanono. It's a biography of Pompey the Great, who's here called the Roman Alexander. That's a weird title. That's a weird title to brand on Pompey the Great, but this figure has attracted weird titles right from the beginning, right from when he was in his early 20s, and started telling people to call him the Great. That's not a name that he left to chance. He told people to call him that. And he's an utterly fascinating figure. There have been 4 really good biographies of him in the last 60 years. Robin Leach is probably the author of the one that you know best. Probably that's the one that your library has, if your library has anything. So what this author does with the source material will be fascinating. Pompey is liberally represented in the source material. There was a time period in Roman history from the height of the fame of Marius to the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. That period, but especially the period when Rome is changing from a more or less free republic to an autocracy, that period is embarrassingly well documented. Unbelievable how much we have on that period. It's great because it's an incredibly pivotal period in Roman history, but it's lavishly documented. So you can definitely write a big, incredibly detailed biography of Pompey the Great. We'll see. We'll see what this author does with it. Okay, then we have the editor, or the writer here is Howard Jones. This is Eyes on the Stars and Feet on the Ground: The Foreign Policy of Theodore Roosevelt. And that's fascinating to me. This is giving all the right spidey sense feelings, like Francis of Assisi, actually like Pompey the Great as well. It's easy to write a dumb book about Theodore Roosevelt. Easy to. People were doing it while he was still alive. People were doing it while he was still in office. Famous names and not so famous names writing dumb books about Theodore Roosevelt. No offense to June on the Range, but Owen Wister never had trouble writing a dumb book, and he wrote a dumb book about Theodore Roosevelt, and so did everybody else. The number of good books about this figure is almost as small as the number of genuinely good books about, for instance, President Reagan. Some presidents are just like that. They elicit dumb books. But something about this tells me it won't be. And it's high time that it wasn't. It's high time that we started studying these progressive presidents in detail while the archives are still open, while Americans are still legally allowed to do that. This could be really good. The foreign policy of Theodore Roosevelt is so dumbed down in popular accounts that it even has its own dumb slogan. You know, speak softly and carry a big stick is Theodore Roosevelt. So, but he seldom did either. So it'd be great if this were good. The last book that I read on popular press on this subject was a thing called Imperial Cruise, which was wrong almost in every literal sentence. So here's hoping that this is better. Roosevelt deserves it. Believe me, he was an egomaniac, but he would have been more irritated than anybody at the way most people have written about him in the last 100 years. It would have bothered him more than anybody. Anyway. Okay. All right. We've got, I can't speak for Francis of Assisi, but Pompey the Great, I can. Theodore Roosevelt, I can. We are, I guess, dealing with a little parade of egomaniacs here. Now we have a book, I think we've seen it already on this channel, Josiah Osgood's new book, Lawless Republic, about Cicero, who has been the subject of even more books than Pompey the Great. And here we have, this is an author that I like, and here we have a book about, I assume Cicero's glory days, what he called his glory days, what he called the days when he was the savior of the Republic, which, again, is not a title that he wanted to leave to chance. He, like Pompey, they had a lot in common, Cicero and Pompey. And like Pompey, Cicero did not want to leave the title savior of the Republic to random chance and started working it into conversation. I'm neutral in my personal reaction to Pompey the Great. It's a fantastic story, so I want to read someone else's account of it. I'm not neutral when it comes to Theodore Roosevelt, and in the exact opposite direction, I'm not neutral when it comes to Cicero. So I don't expect Josiah Osgood to make me like Cicero. If Robert Harris couldn't do that in 3 novels, then I don't think that Osgood's going to be able to. But I want to read. There's a lot of ancient Roman history coming out in 2025. So it makes me curious to know. If I'm around in 2025, I'll be curious to see what Osgood does with this figure. Then we have Nicola Clark, a historian I tend to like. This is her new book, The Waiting Game, which is the story of ladies in waiting in the Tudor court, and what that means, what that really was. It was a heavily sought-after position. It was paid, but it was perilous. It could be very, very boring, and that boredom itself could lead you into trouble that could lead you to the scaffold, and certainly to ruin. So what we think of it, we might be tempted to think of it now in terms of, for instance, the late Queen Elizabeth II, who had ladies in waiting, but it was a bureaucratic position. It was completely bloodless. Whereas here, it was a vital, very energetic thing. I've read in the last few years, last few decades, I've read two really good books on equerries of the body for the king and ladies in waiting for queens. Only one in the Tudor period, so there's a lot of material here. There's a lot of worth and thinking to be done here. We'll see if this author does it. I don't know, if this author will do it. But then this next one is historical reevaluation. Like I mentioned, I'm always up for that. We'll see. This is by Bennett Parton, and it's called Somewhere Toward Freedom. And it's a look at General Sherman's famous March to the Sea during the American Civil War, but not in terms of railroads twisted, Sherman's bow ties, not in terms of armies routed, not in terms of the flagrant lies that Sherman and his press corps put forward, that his army touched not a chicken, harmed not a widow. Ridiculous. It was an army of depredation. It led a swath of destruction, rapine, and arson throughout its wake. But this looks like it's going to look at the whole March to the Sea from a different angle, which is that Sherman freed people as he went. He freed slaves as he went. A massive amount of social disruption. And I don't know that I've ever read an account of Sherman's march that looked at it that way. So this could be really, really good. I'm always up for American Civil War stuff anyway. Okay. Right, this next one's a little bit specialized. I think you can draw larger lessons from it, but I don't imagine there are many of you who are going to want this next book. I do. This is by Terry Vanderwall and Neil Bernstein, and it is The Natural History of the Turtles of Iowa, coming out next month. All the different kinds of turtles that you can find in the streams and rivers of Iowa and on the shores of the Mississippi, and their natural history and their endangerment prospects, their conservation status, although here it's probably not that much to worry about aside from just the loss of water, the withdrawal of water from aquifers and streams and riverbeds and whatnot. But I find turtles fascinating. I have never in my life allowed any of my dogs to kill them or even to torment them. My beagles learned pretty early on that I didn't want them to kill anything unless I tell them to. No matter what you encounter, don't kill it unless I tell you to. And they were okay with that. Some of them less okay than others, but they were okay with that. And all the strays that I used to bring with me when I traveled, they were all okay with that, more or less, some less than others. But the thing that would always draw cocked heads of just bewilderment is when they wanted to torment a turtle, when they wanted to throw a turtle between them for 5 miles down a field. And I told them no to that. And that was just, what? We're not going to disobey you. And the killing thing, okay, but we can't even do this? This is harmless, but it's not harmless. It's not harmless. It traumatizes a turtle. So thanks to my dogs, I met a lot of the turtles of Iowa. So this is of interest to me. Anyway, we'll see. I don't imagine it'll be of interest to anyone else. And this next thing, I don't know that it will be of interest to many people. And the people that it is of interest to are the last kinds of readers I want to meet. Isn't that always the way of it? This is translated by Marjorie Perloff, and this is the next installment in the notebooks of Wittgenstein. So there he is as a young hottie incel, a black-pilled incel. This is an ongoing project, translating the notebooks and private diaries of Wittgenstein. It's a massive, tangled project. I don't know. I try to estimate what kind of coverage books like this will get. The Turtles of Iowa, of course, will get no coverage at all, except maybe in Iowa presses. But where in Iowa will you find a newspaper that prints book reviews? Where will you find that? Especially many book reviews. If you, like, for instance, does the Des Moines Register still print book reviews? It's probably the biggest paper in the state. If the Des Moines Register still prints book reviews, I bet they do one a month, and only about either some bestseller or something controversial. I doubt very much they have a daily book critic. They should, and that daily book critic should be me. I could guarantee them subscriptions. plain and simple. I can guarantee it. But I don't know. I don't think there's a newspaper anywhere in Iowa that would actually review this book or the Turtles of Iowa. I don't think there is, and I don't. So this will be left to the major organs to do, the major organs and me to do, and I don't know what you could do if you were a commissioning editor. I don't know what you would do with this. If you wanted it reviewed, what's the list of people who can review it for you? I would imagine that list is very small. I think it's fascinating. So, and that is it. That is, we're all over the map here for these, but that is just a small selection of some of the things that are coming out next month that might interest you down the line. So I'll wrap this up for now. Maybe we'll do another one of these in the next week, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.